Well, the great artists of the 19th century were almost all European, right? Granted, a few Americans like Whistler and Winslow Homer were starting to break through. But what a lot of people don't know is that there was great art also being made in the Caribbean and South America. One of the best, Francisco Oller, came from San Juan, Puerto Rico, and is currently the subject of a major exhibit at the Brooklyn Museum. We want to welcome Richard Asti. He is the museum's curator of European art, and if now you're a little confused, that's exactly why he's here. Richard, welcome to BK Live.
Thanks, Aaron. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure is all mine. So tell us a little bit about Francisco Oller and about his life.
Sure. He's a Puerto Rican painter, as you mentioned, born in 1833 in San Juan. But unlike his fellow Puerto Rican artists, he travels. And at age 18, his mother finally lets him leave the island. He tried at 16. And his first stop was Madrid. He studies there for a few years. He goes back as court painter to the Spanish king. And he also studies in France. In total, about 22 years in Europe. The unique thing about Francisco Oller is that he always comes home. And he applies everything he learns in Europe at academies, at avant-garde circles, to local things, people, places, and things of his beloved Puerto Rico.
Okay. So what was the artistic element at the time when he first went to Europe?
Sure. So when he first moves to Europe, it's to Spain. And he's studying in a very academic tradition of neoclassicism, a revival of Greek and Roman references to very fine painting. He does that during the day at the Royal Academy, and in the afternoon he studies at the Prado. And he looks at this great museum's collection of old master paintings, in particular the style of Diego Velázquez, also a Spanish court painter, but 200 years before Oller. And he learns something from him.
Okay. Now, we were talking earlier, I said, well, is he considered an impressionist? Is he you said he's a modern painter?
Yes.
How exactly do you classify him?
It's complicated. Oller is not an easy person to pinpoint in style. Unlike his fellow impressionists in Paris, where he spends many years, he changes styles often throughout his career. There are moments where he's an impressionist, there are moments where he's a realist, a naturalist, a Barbizon school plein air painter, and sometimes you find these different styles side by side in the same canvas. Details will be impressionistic, other details will not be. They'll be very realistic.
Okay. Now, we do have some images that we are showing. Can you tell us about this piece right here?
It's a masterpiece. It's the first thing you're going to see when you come to Brooklyn and see the show. It's a still life, one of his great traditions, still life of coconuts, painted very mature moment in his career, 1893. And he really monumentalizes the fruit of his native Caribbean basin. He's rooted in local objects.
Okay. Now, when he painted this, was he in Europe or was he in Puerto Rico at the time?
He was back in Puerto Rico, but he had already spent about 20 years in Europe. So he's applying the current trends of still life painting to local food stuff.
Okay. Now, who are some of his contemporaries and maybe some of the other artists that'll be featured?
Yes, because the show is 85 paintings and only 40 are by Oller. So we purposely presented him in context, showing 45 works by his contemporaries on both sides of the Atlantic, as well as artists that predate Oller to show the stage in which he became a mature painter. Some of the earlier artists that predate Oller include Jose Campeche, the great Afro-Puerto Rican painter of still lifes, of portraits, and of religious subjects. And then some of his friends who are also in the show, yet never shown side by side with him in art museums, include Camille Pizarro, who was also born in the Caribbean. People don't know this. Claude Monet, Paul Cezanne. You mentioned some American artists in the show, too, who are coming to the Caribbean, exactly like Winslow Homer. Frederick Church, the great master of Hudson River School painting. He also goes to the Caribbean. He comes to Jamaica. So we really present the Caribbean basin as an important center for artistic production in Oller's day and before.
Okay. Now we have another image as well. Who is this by?
This is the man of the hour, Francisco Oller, painting his friend, the well-known impressionist and post-impressionist Paul Cezanne. So this little painting is very powerful because it's proof that this Puerto Rican artist was in the cutting-edge avant-garde circles in Paris at the time. He's painting his friend. They're both painting outdoors. And what he shows in this very small but beautiful painting is the tools of the trade, what you would bring with you when you're in suburban Paris painting the countryside.
Okay. Let me go to the next image.
This was a very challenging loan for the museum because we brought it all the way from Paris, from the Musée d'Orsay, their permanent collection has 2 paintings by Francisco Oller, and this is the masterpiece. It's been in France since it was painted in 1864, and very early on it was acquired by a major patron of the Impressionists, a Dr. Paul Gachet, who treated Vincent van Gogh and his mental illness. He also, in addition to buying paintings by Van Gogh, was buying works by Francisco Oller, and it entered that private collection early on and was given to the French state in 1951. It shows a medical student holding a human skull next to a woman possibly knitting, and that could be a quotation from a very famous painting on view then and now in the Louvre Museum by Vermeer.
Next time I'm at the Louvre, I'm going to have to go and stop by and see that painting.
Please.
Okay, now this one, this gentleman, military.
Yes, so Oller paints scenes of everyday life. He paints people, places, and things. And this is one of his great portraits of a colonel in Spain, painted in 1880, just a few months after that same colonel had returned from the Philippines. The Philippines were part of the Spanish Empire at that moment. And this is a very global moment in world history, the 19th century. Oller is just one part of this very large interconnected story. So we present him here as a bridge between what we see here, suburban Madrid, and Puerto Rico.
Okay. Why was it so important to do that, to show him in the context of the old world and the new world?
Yes. Oller is a very tricky artist to pinpoint, as I mentioned, and you really can't understand his artistic development without seeing who he was looking to, who he was painting alongside, and who he was learning from. He takes many influences on both sides of the Atlantic and applies them back home to Puerto Rico. So to just show paintings by Oller, which has been done here in 1983, would kind of miss the larger story. Oller is a beautiful bridge between the old world and the new, and he's a product of these 2 sides of the Atlantic. The Atlantic Ocean was completely bridged since the 16th century, the moment Columbus crossed it for the first time in 1492. 300-400 years later, when Oller makes that crossing, he is reflecting a very global exchange across that great ocean.
And across time as it is. Okay, tell us about this beautiful image right here.
So you mentioned Winslow Homer. This is one of 2 Homer watercolors in the exhibition of a woman going to the market in Nassau, the Bahamas, painted in 1885 by Homer. He was sent there by Century magazine to do a piece on tourism, to promote the region, the Bahamas in particular, and try to lure New Yorkers and Bostonians to the basin.
Okay.
This is complete propaganda.
Now I have to ask you, what is your personal favorite painting by Oller?
In the show, we have many of his sugar plantations, and the Brooklyn Museum acquired one in particular 3 years ago. We just have one work by Oller in the permanent collection, and it's Hacienda La Fortuna. It's the most successful, thriving sugar plantation in the 19th century in Puerto Rico. And why I love it so much is that he takes a bold approach to landscape. He shows what's the equivalent of a wide-angle lens, putting so many buildings into a work that you can't take in with the naked eye. He expands the story. He includes field workers in the foreground, some of the homes where the plantation owners would have lived, and all the sugar that was being collected in that plantation was being sent here, just a few blocks from where we're standing in Williamsburg.
So it's a caption into time. How did painting sort of transition from where artists would study in order to accurately, depict landscapes or, a portrait of an aristocrat or military person, royalty, into impressions about time and changing light and angles? What sort of changed in the art world that brought on this movement?
It's a very good point. The academic tradition in the 19th century, and Oller lives through this transition, was always focused on very arrested moments, almost frozen images painted in quotations of ancient Greek and Roman sculpture. So the paintings looked stiff because they were meant to elevate you as you looked at them. Painting, according to academics, very conservative circles, was meant to serve as an example of how we should behave. Paintings of everyday life were considered very low subject matter and not really appropriate for a museum, an art gallery, or a contemporary art fair. Now in 1850, 1860, artists in Paris start challenging that notion of what is high art, and they start expanding the subject matter to include everyday scenes of people, of places, of things, no history, no religion, but that there's enough subject matter going on right in our backyard that's worthy of capturing on canvas. And the best way to paint modern life, according to these avant-garde painters, including Oller, was to paint in a very loose, broken way, almost unfinished, to show an impression. It's not a recreation of what you see. It's not a photograph. We've already got photography at this time doing just that. So painting has to step up and contribute something else to artistic evolution. And what it does is produce impressions.
Okay. Now, everything you just said, I sort of see in this painting right here. Can you tell us about this beautiful piece?
It's a masterpiece from Brooklyn's own collection. 20% of the show includes works from our permanent collection, like this one, Paul Cezanne's 1885 landscape of Gardanne in the south of France, near his hometown of Aix-en-Provence. What's radical about this, and why Picasso fell in love with this painting when he saw it after the artist died in 1903, is that Paul Cezanne, is shattering this academic illusion of a window. And what he's doing here is reinforcing the two-dimensionality of the canvas. So nature here, a hillside town in the south of France, is reduced to squares, to spheres, to cones, to rectangles. He's actually creating a geometric approach to nature. He's making it more modern.
Okay. Now, I know you have a really short answer to this. We talked about it outside, but is painting dead?
Not for me. I study in a very academic tradition, so my dissertation is on Michelangelo. I still believe in the primacy of the figure and of academic training. Certainly contemporary artists continue to expand the potential of painting as an expressive force. So absolutely not. I was a dealer for many years. I worked in the market, and I still follow market trends. And if you follow sales at Christie's and Sotheby's, Lucian Freud, Francis Bacon, these artists are constantly elevating the price that we pay for traditional painting practice, but in a very innovative way. So no. Painting is far from dead.
All right.
Absolutely not.
And the exhibit runs till January 3rd.
It does.
At the Brooklyn Museum.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.